All right. Well, my name is Derrick Mayne. I'm a student in the School of Individualized Study, utilizing the online option, and my concentrations are in engineering and project management. I'm currently employed full-time in medical manufacturing and enrolled in SOIS to complete my bachelor's degree, which I started 36 years ago here at RIT. So it's been a little while. Let me get my screen up here and sharing this. Where am I at?
Got it.
All right. And hopefully we have the full screen effect.
Looks great.
All right, now we'll get started. Let me turn myself off. A little easier to see that way. All right. The name of my project is Closed Loop Manufacturing. It's single product family manufacturing in a closed loop automated cell. The project is to set up and stabilize an automated manufacturing cell, which we call Global Cup Cell or Global Cup Project, GCP, capable of producing 32 different sizing trials for hip replacement surgery. This is to be done with minimal human intervention to the process. The parts to be manufactured range in size from 41 millimeter to 72 millimeters in diameter, and they're visually captured here on this slide. They all have the same dimensions on most of their features across all the various sizes, and the rest of the dimensions are tabulated based on the individual part size. Using this tabulation, variables are automatically loaded into the machine controller based on what size is being run. These variables allow one parametrically based CNC or computer numeric control program to manufacture all 32 size parts. This makes it a good choice for automation. The project's timeline has the manufacturing cell operational, stable, and above 85% efficient within a 10-week period to meet the customer's needs. Efficiency of the manufacturing cell will be measured by evaluating the overall equipment effectiveness, which is referred to as OEE. All right, it's not moving. Why is it not moving? There we go. Overall equipment effectiveness, or OEE, is a mathematical combination of three metrics. The first metric is availability. Availability is defined as the actual running time divided by the total operative time. In other words, what percentage of the shift was the machine capable of producing its parts? This is then multiplied to the performance, and the performance is defined as the actual output divided by the possible output. In this case, the pieces per hour the cell produces as compared to the pieces per hour that the cell is expected to produce. This is then multiplied to the quality, and the quality is really defined as the good parts made divided by the sum of all parts produced, both good and bad. This is then multiplied to 100 to get a combined percentage value. A machining cell's overall effectiveness is more than just the quantity of parts it produces during a shift. OEE gives a complete view of the cell, considering how much potential output was limited due to lost availability or poor quality. Data will be collected daily using programs I created for data acquisition to compute these values and to evaluate how the cell is performing to the required goal. I've selected this project because I've been tasked with this complex project in my place of work and would like to get a deeper understanding of how systems such as this one function. It pulls together all the skills I've accumulated over my working career and will expand my knowledge base into areas of my career I have not had the opportunity to explore. This type of manufacturing is becoming more common, and it will be beneficial to learn this level of detail. So what do I hope to get out of the project? I hope to get a more precise understanding of how complex systems can interact with each other. I want to develop new skills in modern manufacturing methods, become proficient in VBA programming, which is Visual Basic for applications, for the purpose of data acquisition. I want to learn aspects of lean manufacturing as it applies to the productivity metrics, and to explore process engineering to create sustainable, repeatable manufacturing system. The defining components of this manufacturing cell consists of two Multishue 2000 multitasking machining centers, each with an auto-load bar feeder. These machines physically manufacture the parts out of round bar stock. Each of these Multis machines has TMAC software installed on them from Karen Engineering. This software will aid in the monitoring of tool conditions of the rotating tools during cutting. The information from TMAC is displayed in a time-based graphical form, and bounds are assigned to them to alert the operators to abnormalities to the cutting conditions. There are two Zeiss Duramax coordinate measuring machines, or CMMs, installed to inspect the parts manufactured. Each of these machines has easy comp software from Ovation Engineering installed, which are providing real-time dimensional feedback to the Multis machine controllers of pertinent dimensional deviations. The Fanuc robot acts as the central unit in the cell, interacting with all pieces of equipment. It's constantly looping its program, waiting on each piece of equipment to request it via IO signals or input-output signals, essentially looking for a voltage to change on a specific connection. This is the system diagram for the cell. The cell has system inputs at each of the Multis machines. Raw material is added, variables assigned, and adjustment made to tools as needed. The robot is the centerpiece of the cell and handles all interactions within the system, from removal of part from the machine all the way through to the output of a finished part. Each Duramax CMM measures a part and sends data back to the machine controller. Tool adjustments are made through variable manipulation of this data, utilizing programmed algorithms at the start of each machining cycle. This does result in a lag of the tool adjustments, as the machine is already cutting the next part when the CMM data is pushed over. This lag must be accounted for in the algorithms. Initial logic for this algorithm was set with an offset adjustment being applied at about 1/4 of the CMM deviation value to slowly walk a feature into its nominal dimension. Monitoring of the dimensional stability of the parts during manufacturing showed that some adjustments needed to be more aggressive, while others needed to be less aggressive to achieve this stability. As previously stated, the robot handles all interactions within the cell and is its centerpiece of its operation. Each Multis machine manufactures a part following a computer numerically controlled or CNC program. The robot unloads a completed part when the machine sends a request, and the manufactured part size is passed via binary signals to the robot when this happens. The robot restarts the machining process on the machine when unload is complete, immerses the part in a jet of air to blow off the cutting fluid, repositions its grip on the part, and moves it onto the CMM fixture. A start signal is then sent to the CMM, in addition to the part size, again via binary signals. The CMM measures all features of the part and creates a PDF file of results and graphs for the operator to monitor. Inspection results are stored in separate computer folders based on part size. Using the EasyComp software, a text data file is transferred on the Multis machine from earmarked dimensions, and then the robot is signaled to come get the part. The robot then takes the part off the CMM, moves the part into a completed drawer if it's in tolerance, or out an audit chute if it's out of tolerance, then resumes waiting for the next request from the equipment. As I started this project, the physical installation of all these systems was underway. The full cell is shown here. All programming code for the cell was completed by outside vendors, but refinements were necessary to ultimately make a quality part. I had to research the programming and operation of the Multis machines to begin getting them set up to manufacture parts and to make these refinements to the programs. Some of the first tasks to complete after getting the machines physically making good parts was to develop the data acquisition programs necessary to track the cell for stability and for performance. I created multiple programs in Excel using VBA. These were created mainly using drop-down boxes, so the data recorded is in a standard format to allow data mining in the future. The operators of the cell are running several of these programs simultaneously on the 4-monitor workstation, monitoring the cell's function and recording data. Data collection will continue to be ongoing throughout the life of the project, constantly looking for opportunities to improve the system. The OEE calculator captures all the data needed to calculate OEE and populates an ongoing spreadsheet with the data. This app records the planned and unplanned activities that affect uptime for the availability metric, as well as capturing parts produced to calculate the performance and quality metrics. The tool changing app captures tool change events, tabulates the reason for the tool change, and requests input of the life data on the tool being changed in both pieces that were cut and the time and minutes the tool was in use. I also added a pop-up warning note of the dimensional features that are likely to be affected by the tool change to help preserve quality during the tool change event. This app is being used to set up and monitor tool life settings to create a stable machining environment. Data collected here will also be useful in the improvement of the availability metric of OEE as we look to optimize tool life and increase uptime. The Scrap Failure app captures part failures for root cause analysis of the most common failures. Processes can then be wrapped around them to drive process stability and improve the quality metric of OEE. To drive towards stability, the process must be standardized. First, you must standardize and then you can improve. Many people will be operating this cell, and to get repeatable results, we need standardized processes in place. Everyone needs to be doing the same tasks the same way each time. I had to create several instructions to begin standardizing the cell. Changeover instructions were created to document the physical work holding changes needed from one part size to another, and were done in a step-by-step fashion with pictures. Tooling setup instructions were created documenting how the tools are set up in the machine. Notes related to tool changing, what features they are cutting, their safety monitor load settings, expected tool life, as well as what dimension is directly affected by changing the tool. A changeover checklist was then created to have the operators follow the same flow of operations as they change over the machine from order to order. Further standardization was more towards the operational process of the cell. Again, to be operationally stable and efficient, everyone needs to be doing the same task the same way each time. The flow of work from startup through its exit out of the departmental area was documented in the GCP processing instruction. Each phase of the manufacturing operation in the cell has key instructions defined. In addition, rules of engagement were created to define the expectation of the operators in their daily activities and interaction with the automated cell. The last step in my journey to stability was to define the potential failure points. We call them upset conditions, and to document how to safely recover from them. An upset condition is being defined as any situation that arises that requires the manual interaction with the machine, not related to a planned tool change. Interacting with the machine during an upset condition needs to be done in a very safe manner. This cell will be running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and any failure points need to be safely recovered from without the need for upper level technicians on hand. I've documented 26 events so far. These instructions created are down to a very basic level, showing a button by button solution, again with pictures, for the interaction on the equipment as to minimize the downtime associated with these events and get the equipment back into running order in a safe manner. The final step for this project is to get this cell over the 85% combined OEE value that I'm looking for to meet customer delivery requirements. Initial values have the cell around 80% mark to date, and I have the utmost confidence I will meet the benchmark goal in the next week or two. And is there any questions?
Yeah, thanks, Derrick. Yeah, I have a lot of questions, more questions than we have time for. My first comment is that this is not your father's Oldsmobile. I mean, we're really getting pretty sophisticated here.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
So just briefly for context, we're talking about hip replacement parts, right?
Yes, the sizing trials, when you first get into surgery, before they actually define what size implant they need to put in, they pre-size a couple of different sizes to see how the fit is. Once they unseal an implant, they have to use it. They can't put it back. These sizing trials are reusable. So basically they'll kind of mock it up and get you set up with a particular size and then open up the implant.
Are we talking about titanium here?
This is a 17-4 stainless steel.
Stainless steel, okay.
Yeah, the implant itself will be cobalt chrome or titanium, but the sizing trials are typically made out of stainless, and they clean them in an autoclave and reuse them on the next patient.
So this is for sizing. It isn't actually the hip replacement.
No, this is strictly to gain size in surgery just prior to them.
I see.
Typically, they'll grab 3 sizes, what the surgeon thinks is the right size, and then plus or minus.
I see.
A little larger, a little smaller, and then they'll mock up the sizing trial and then grab the one they need.
Definition of what's a cell? How do you define a cell?
Well, I define the work cell. Basically, it's just a closed group of equipment all interlooped together.
Okay.
As a manufacturing area, I'm just one basically boxed off department, and everything basically flows from machine to machine in my one little area.
It struck me as I looked at the video in particular that the physical placement of the different components is very important, right? I mean,
Yes.
for one thing, the robot has to be able to reach everything, just in a
Yep.
very simple way. So your project also included setting the whole thing up, right? Not only setting up how you want it to run and how to run efficiently, but also actually physically setting the thing up so that it worked.
Yeah, the equipment was laid out already in the floor plan as they designed the cell. I have to physically get the machine set up to actually cut the parts, install the tools, check the zeros in the machine, get all that running, and then essentially figure out how to adjust the tools and get it cutting a quality part. I didn't have to define the floor space layout of the cell. That was already defined when the cell was initially, designed for purchase.
Okay, so so this is obviously, I assume, state of the art. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't know if your company existed then and was doing this sort of work then, but how was it done years ago?
Years ago, it would have been done, basically the loading and unloading would have been by hand. The cycle would have ended. Somebody would have had to interact with the machine, open up the door, physically remove the part, and then walk it over to whatever piece of equipment would be inspecting it. It would all been, like I said, it would all been labor intensive. The whole idea of the automation is to take some of the labor out of it. It helps drive the cost down.
Okay, so you say some of the labor, and you did mention people, humans working to make this whole system work. So in the video, though, we just saw the robot. We didn't see any people, I don't think. But there are people who are sort of monitoring that this is working, right? And people are reading the output and the measurements to make sure you're at 85% and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, I do the calculations and run through all that data. I have guys that are running it. They're there basically just to change the tools.
Okay.
And a tool life comes up or something. Their interaction is strictly refined to just change the tools, basically set the tool length to the machine. You have to tell the machine how long the tool is. There's like a setter arm in the machine. Basically, they have to reset the machine with the new tool, restart the program, and then they go back to just monitoring that it is still running.
Okay, got it.
Their interaction is very, very limited, and the skill set of the personnel that we require to run this type of cell is really on the lower skill set level than like a person myself that has to get the thing up and running. The idea is not to have to pay somebody a premium. That's what the robot's there for.
Yeah, got it. Okay, fascinating. Thanks a lot. Meg?
Yeah, so similar to Steve and Derrick, a million questions, very complex, obviously. Can you tell me how the process went for choosing this project? And is this really integrated into your current job?
Yeah, this is a customer has a need for these sizing trials. So our company took this on as a project. They already had the designs laid out probably, a couple years ago. Equipment is here. We're starting to install it at the start of this project, which worked out well timing wise. But I was tasked with this department, and as part of that is to get this thing up and running. This is going to be an ongoing project. I believe the scope of it is at least 5+ years. With this thing running at this capacity. In fact, I believe next year it's supposed to almost double in the output that they're expecting for this year. We are going to start running it 24/7, round the clock. I'm hoping to have the second shift working on it next week to really start to get the ramp up into full-blown round-the-clock production on it. Right now, we're just operating on a day shift, trying to work out the bugs, get it running, trying to get it stable, and then I'll start to get more hands into it and get it running, more around the clock. But this is a long-term project that the customers, tasked us with doing.
Right. So where, I guess I would ask, through the work for the capstone, what would you say were some takeaways that would have been different if you hadn't been doing this project, just since this was part of your work process?
I would have had a lot more people probably doing the work as opposed to myself, especially down to the level that we have a programming department, we have engineers, we have all that. I kind of pushed most of those aside so that I had a lot more hands-on involvement in everything that was going on. even down to the program level, there's a lot of code I had to change in the program in order to get it to do what I wanted to do. Just from a safety standpoint, I put a bunch of stuff in the program. So ultimately, I could have tasked it all off and had our other departments kind of just hand it to me and say, here, start running it. But I really wanted to get into it and understand how it all works and take the project on, including setting it up myself. I mean, I have staff to do all that, but I really wanted to get down into the weeds, so to speak, on how this thing works.
That's great. So, so some takeaways, probably got a little bit more in-depth knowledge or experience about what was happening every step of the way.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'll definitely say I am the subject matter expert on this cell in the shop. I don't think anybody knows more than I do about what this thing does.
Great. I think that should go on our capstone poster explanation of what this project should be. So that's fantastic. Really interesting. I could ask 10 more questions, but we're already at the halfway mark and we probably want to give everybody else a chance to get through here without holding them too long. So really nice job, very thorough, very complex, but you made it understandable for us. So that was nice.
Yeah, nice job, Derrick. Magree, it's up. You're up.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay. So my project is
So Magree, I'm sorry, you don't have it in presentation mode, just so you know.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There you go.
So my project is on helping RIT Sustainability Department on implementing the composting plan, which we hope that will be in place in a year or so. So for post-consumer composting, we are focusing on whatever material that's passed, like for dining locations. So basically for consumers who have had food, so it's not the kitchen back end stuff that's being studied for this project. So mainly it's focusing on like everyday consumption, food consumption on campus. And for the purpose of this project, it's only for the dining locations that we are looking at. So a little bit about why composting and this term of circular economy, I think many people are familiar with. So basically we are trying to make less waste. And here we can see the data where United States sends more than 90% of food waste to landfill, where a lot of that can be composted and then used to as fertilizers for growing more food or for other purposes. Instead of just dumping them in landfills, we can actually upcycle the waste. So a couple questions of like, what comes to mind when you're asked why compost? Not many people do it regularly, especially in New York State. It's not required by law. When I first started the project, I thought of California as a good state to look at. However, my mentor, Enid Cardinal, who is the president of the sustainability department on RIT, said to look at New York State or states that do not require people to compost by law. So it would be a better benchmark to look at, because when it's required by law, the state and many organizations would have methods already in place and a lot of educational material out there for people to do it. And since it's required by law, so everyone is expected to compost. However, here in New York State, and specifically we're looking at RIT campus, there's no requirement. we know that RIT focuses on moving towards sustainability, and there's a carbon neutral goal by 2030. But there's not a lot of clear directions on composting out on campus. We have seen a couple of bins labeled as compost, but many people are unsure about what can be put in there, especially when they are placed in academic buildings. Yeah, so a little moving on. So I just want to say that the law of conservation is that whatever we generate as waste, we direct them to landfill or wherever it ends up, does not disappear, even though we don't see it in our house, but it's still there. And then there's, sorry. And there's this meme on what if garbage collection is just organized littering? So many of the times we don't really think about how much waste we generate and then where they end up. But it's really something we should consider and shifting to a more sustainable lifestyle. And I collected 3 interesting facts about compost. Here we can see that there's a bird that used compost to incubate its eggs, because the compost piles would heat up. That also can bring some benefits to how we kind of use energy wisely. And then this one's also related to the heat that the compost pile can generate. So you can actually cook in some compost, but we definitely don't recommend that on campus. And also, since Rochester is one of the cooler climates, I think this fact would be interesting to have more projects later on when we actually have composting implemented on campus, so that we can use it to plant some plants either in dorms or just have students or faculties take home. So why composting at RIT campus? So currently we have, I got these numbers from Enid. So we're generating 22 tons of food waste per week during school time. So when we're fully in session in person, that's how much food waste we generate. And that's roughly 32 weeks out of a year. So over 700 tons of food waste per year, which can be redirected out of landfill. And that waste currently costs RIT $50,000 to haul away. So here I have this 70 times this type of dinosaur called Saltosaurus. So that's kind of how much it would weigh, the 700 pounds. Another thing to think about is the Christ the Redeemer statue. That's how much it weighs. So some of the benefits that we can have from redirecting that waste is obviously material upcycling, and can be used for many different purposes, mostly fertile and like planting. We have a community garden on campus, and talking to Enid that we're thinking mostly using the soil that we generate on campus, that we're not really going to sell or redirect to other locations. And through this, we would lessen our carbon emission. So that will help with RIT's goal of reaching carbon neutral by 2030. And when we talk about the community learning about composting and actually doing it, it's a great way to shift our lifestyles to a more sustainable way. So I said like sustain word. Yeah. Okay. So for RIT, Ina already planned for this aerated static pile composting. So basically aerated means like with air circulation, that since it's a static pile, it doesn't need a lot of maintenance. We just have the site by the solar arrays dedicated for the composting site, which is by our solar field. And basically we would have these like blowers to blow air through the composting pile. And that would help with maintaining a consistent oxygen level, and also with maintaining the heat. Since this type of composting is less labor intensive and not too expensive, and can generate a large amount of compost, RIT is already in the process of implementing this. But as we know that Rochester is still a cooler climate, without a lot of information, the estimated time for the compost to be ready would be about 3 months. It can depend on a different environment and the type of mixture and things that go into the compost, and also the temperature change by season for how long it takes for the compost to be ready. And this is definitely a question that many people ask, what exactly is compostable? And also another reason why we chose this type of composting is that it's very versatile. We can have a lot of, most food scraps would go into this type. Dairy products are compostable in this type as well as some paper, as you can see here, and also yard waste. But we still need to watch out for some grease processed, and also animal byproducts, which I don't think that would be a problem for IT. But what I researched and looked into is that some chemicals and herbicides in the food can be a problem if we're wanting to use that compost for growing food later on. It would be a more intensive research project to do for looking into all the food sources that RIT carries that would potentially end up in the compost pile. Yeah. So some further research and discussions. I wasn't able to do customer surveys, but once I got into the project and did some research, I found that would be very valuable to test some assumptions, and also the methods of implementation. As I mentioned before, like identifying some like hazard source of like maybe chemicals in the food source would be important as well. And there's also an area for customer behavior studies, especially for sustainable change, such as in this case would be specifically for composting. I don't see a lot of studies done, but there are other studies done on like changing behavior, switching to more sustainable products or things like that, but not very specific for composting. If I had more time, I would be able to reach out to other universities in New York State that have implemented a successful on-campus post-consumer composting system. but unfortunately, I wasn't able to interview any of the program people. Another thing is that volunteers at Compost Bin early on in the beginning of implementing the program, it would be definitely very helpful to have someone stand by the compost bins in dining locations to help people with sorting out the food and the recycling and the trash. I think that's just very important since a lot of people are still confused about what is compostable. And since sometimes the different types of composting can involve different things, being able, being okay with composted or not. So in the beginning, it would be definitely helpful for some volunteers to stay there, but the exact time and the budget would depend. And also like how long we need this program to be in place might depend on how fast people can adapt to it. And also the methods we used before fully implementing the composting program, such as educational content. I think creating like a video or even like a course on composting specifically for the RIT community would be helpful. That can be put into like the new student orientation or the first year RIT 360, or also collaborate with other sustainability related clubs on campus. However, Ina did mention that it's not enough to rely on the sustainable clubs to help promote these things. So I was thinking perhaps more like volunteering roles, or even asking AmeriCorps to have like a paid position, like AmeriCorps Vista position on campus that would focus on promoting composting or just the education of composting. That would help with the initial implementation of the program. And once the program is running and a lot of people knows about what is compostable and how to compost, it would be much easier to continue from one year to the next once we have some of the things set up, such as the orientation or RIT 360.
Magree, you have 1 minute to wrap up, please.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there's definitely needs to be more testing. I think it would be good to see the different methods, such as have some digital content on the display screens in dining locations versus having like a website and like a QR code to the website for information on composting for the RIT community to scan and learn about. Or creating workshops or even like trivia nights on composting. Just the more involvement we can get would be an easier transition to the composting project. Yeah, that's my presentation.
Thank you, Magree. Meg, do you want to go first or?
Sure.
Okay.
Sure, I'll go first. Thanks, Magree. So lots of really interesting information. I love that it's kind of centered around how this would happen or how this could happen at RIT. So I know that sustainability has been part of your own personal mission. So what would you say is the new learning that's come out of this? Because I know that this has been part of what's interested you. So what's new for you, the new learning, the new takeaways?
I think just looking at different universities and how they have approached it and just the differences among them, because it's definitely not one intervention that would work exactly the same way in different places.
Right.
And I think I have like a lot of ideas to continue the project if possible. And I think that also need a lot more market research and just if I can be back on campus and have like ask people or like connect with people and talk about this more would be very helpful with the project. So it's not just the research and the knowledge that I have or the information I can gather online.
So you want to activate this.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's really interesting. It seems like the data points to there being some real positive impacts of this. So I hope that there's time for you to do some work on this and move it forward with Enid's help.
So Magree, my turn. I loved your phrase, garbage collection is organized littering. I think that's a great way to think of it. I haven't heard that phrase before. I learned another phrase this morning from a student who was talking about the food production business, and I learned the phrase flexitarian, which I'd never heard before. So every presentation I hear in this course, I learn something. So for you, it's garbage collecting is organized littering. So you touched on a couple of times actually, which I'm pleased to hear, a really profound pet peeve of mine, which I have no reason to be so upset about it, but it upsets me. And that is when you go into a men's room, or not necessarily a men's room, you go into any place where there's these bins and it says, I don't know what the exact word is, compostable or landfill. And there's absolutely no way for anybody to know which is which. And if you look in these bins, they have precisely the same material in them. So I assume that nobody knows what the difference is. So when you hit on education, RIT must have gone to great lengths to put these bins in place. And as far as I can tell, with zero education. Mm-hmm. And so it's not exactly closing the door after the horse is bolted, but certainly there ought to have been a lot more education that would have accompanied the institution or the setting up of these bins. So please relay that to Enid, because I really don't like to see that. I know it's important, but I can't make a decision. There's no basis for a decision. Anyway, so I'm glad you pointed that out, and the educational aspect is clearly very important. So to follow up on what Meg said, perhaps a little more seriously, this is a project that you got involved with that had already begun under RIT or specifically Enid's office, and you've pushed it forward. It's not entirely clear to me, in what ways you pushed it forward, but let's assume you pushed it forward. But are you intending, I don't know if you're graduating now. I mean, are you coming back to campus? Are you done?
I'm done. I do want to continue the project, but it would most likely be remote.
Okay, all right. Well, I really encourage you to do that, because you've obviously got a lot of basic knowledge here, and you've got the impetus and the interest and the need to push this even further forward so that it becomes sort of second nature, I guess, is what you want. I mean, the statistics that you mentioned, the $50,000 and the however many tons it was that we generated, I agree. I think that's just terrible. I mean, it seems like it ought to be a simple problem, and I'm glad that we're finally getting around to looking at it. So thank you very much. It's a good project and I think I'm glad that you say you're going to extend it out, because clearly it's not done yet, right? So.
Thank you. I did mention to Enid about the compost bins. We thought about the easiest way is to have like a picture up with the most common compostable things on it with the compost bin, but definitely more educational material would be helpful.
Anything with that would be better than nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thanks very much, Magree. And let's now go to Zach.
All right. Let me get this up here and make sure it works. All right. Is it sharing all right?
Yes, but like Magree, you don't have it in presentation mode.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure it was sharing before I started.
Yeah.
Okay. So, for my presentation, I ended up doing a what is commonly referred to as an adventure book for basically a tabletop role-playing game called Dungeons and Dragons. It's something I've wanted to do for quite some time actually, and have never gotten a proper opportunity to do it. And I figured it would be like having this project was a pretty good opportunity to attempt something like this. Basically, be able to go through all of it. But what this project is it's basically a full-blown book that describes a fantasy world and an adventure that takes place within it that can be run by someone for a group of people, specifically for Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. And so, in general, like world building for tabletop RPGs, it's similar across most of them. The big ones are Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder. And most of any kind of world building that's done for these tabletop games are done in these like they're usually either referred to as setting books, adventure books, campaign books. They're all usually basically the same thing. And in general, they're different from like any kind of normal book that you would read, because a normal book, it's some fictional character going through this story and adventure, and everything is pre-written. The ending doesn't change no matter how many times you read the book. These books are designed more so to basically create this world that the players for the game can interact with, and they in a sense can interact with it however they really want. Whatever they say they want to do, they can try and do for the most part, which obviously changes the way the book has to be written. It has to account for a lot of different things. And in general, the idea, the goal of each of these books is have this world feel alive. It's meant to be able to like respond to whatever the players might do or whatever happens as they go through the adventure. And it's meant to respond like realistically to them. It's not necessarily like what you would have in a video game where you can just kind of, I guess, the first example that comes to mind is for anybody that's played Skyrim, you can kind of walk around and like you can kind of do almost whatever you want to a degree, but like if you commit a crime, say, they will the characters in the game will recognize that you committed a crime, but for the most part, they can forget about it pretty easily. The idea is to not have that be the case in a world like this. Like, people will remember that you did something and what you did, and will view you differently as a result. And all of this is effectively controlled or simulated by the person running the game, who is commonly referred to as the DM or GM, being Dungeon Master or Game Master, respectively. So the content of the book that I am creating specifically is basically a completely original setting with little bits of pre-existing lore taken from different things here and there that basically already existed within certain facets of the world that Dungeons and Dragons has built up. It consists of 4 chapters covering levels of the characters 1 through 4. The max level is 20, though most books don't actually go that high. Most books actually tend to stop, like many of the long adventures tend to stop at level 10. And I actually have never seen any book that goes above level 16. And actually, as I was doing research, it's interesting. The creators of Dungeons and Dragons actually said that they had no plans to release anything that would go above level 16. But many of the books that I looked at, for the very long adventures, they would go to level 10. For the shorter adventures, they stop at around level 4 or 5. So for this project, I figured level 4 would be good. And these 4 chapters will basically take up, they'll be compiled into a PDF, and I expect that PDF to be about 50 pages long, probably a little more than that actually, when everything's said and done. And the other thing that I'm doing for this project is creating a map of basically everywhere that the adventure takes place. And I will talk a little bit more about that part later. So as far as my research goes, I went through several books that both official and unofficial, that basically are these adventure books, and basically looked at how they're structured, how they paced out the different like levels and chapters of the book, how they balanced different things to make it so that like you're not doing anything too crazy, and you're not like throwing some big impossible monster at a basically at a group of players that can't actually deal with it at whatever level they're at. The other book I've been referencing quite a bit is Collaborative World Building for Writers and Gamers, which is a book that was actually written by the professor who teaches the world building class. I've had a little experience with this book before as part of the class, and while it does focus a lot more on the collaborative aspects of world building, you can't really collaborate to build a world without knowing how to build a world in the first place. So it does talk a lot about that near its beginning. Basically how to shape a world that feels realistic and is dynamic in as many ways as possible. So for me, getting started with this entire book basically amounted to like, I can't just sit down and write the entire thing right from scratch. I basically have to start defining things before I can do anything at all. So I have to define things like, what is the scope of the world? How big is it? How many cities are in it? What's the scope of the adventure specifically within this world? Like, how many cities do I think the players are going to visit as they go through the adventure? How big is everything going to be? From there, I can basically create a world outline and description, which basically is just like, what is this world? Like, what are the defining traits of this world? What are the things that anybody living in this world is going to know? And once I know that, I can start building the adventure itself. Basically, what is happening as the characters progress? Like, what is specifically the adventure that the characters are going on? And to start, I only really deal with the main plot. Like, what are the big things that are going to happen? And I can go into details from there more as I get into the project. And the last thing that I always try to do, or at least have always tried to do for this project, is create a rough sketch of the map of the world, just so like I have a visual layout of everything and can basically use that later to create a more in-depth map that will be used by both the players and whoever's running the game itself.
Zach, you have 5 minutes.
All right. The next step of this project is just refining everything. Basically, I go in and start writing the details for the world and the adventure, like all the little bits of everything. Stuff that's not necessarily major plot points, but are still important to the story. Basically, like the things of how do players get from point A to point B? Do they need to walk? Are they traveling by carriage? In this particular world, there are trains that they can take depending on where they're coming from and where they're going. The details on important characters and locations. So basically, rather than moving on from detailing the entire world to writing overarching descriptions of each location, saying like what is anything that anybody that lives in this location would know about it. And also the important characters, what do they do, why are they there, and what is their goal. The in-depth map, which is basically creating an actual digital map based on the sketch and starting to populate it with like the cities and like naming them and defining paths and whatnot. And then the outline for the book. What are the 4 chapters about? And specifically, like, what is each section of each of those chapters about? The biggest step of all this is obviously writing it down. And the sections of the book are basically the introduction, which introduces both the person running the game and the players to the world, tells them all about it, everything important that they need to know about it. Then basically there's a background that tells the DM like, okay, what has happened just before they get up to the adventure itself. And from there, basically, there's a plot hook that is basically a reason for the players to care about what the adventure is, like something that gets them interested in it. And from there, we move on to everything else in quotation marks, which is basically the entire rest of the adventure. What happens after they're invested and everything that goes through that. So I mentioned I was going to talk about a map. Basically, the map portion of this project is I'm using a program called World Anvil to basically upload a map to, write descriptions for each of the locations on that map, and then put little markers wherever they are, such that anybody that visits the site that this map will be on can click on each of these points, see descriptions for them, and then like look at the full descriptions for them from there if it piques their interest. And the end goal is to have all the entries linked together. If it references another location or character, you can view that character's or location's entry right from there. And finally, the things I still have left to do on the project, I still need to finish detailing basically the in-depth notes of the adventure. I need to finish refining the map entries and then start connecting them to the actual map. I need to proofread everything to make sure that it all flows well and obviously doesn't have any spelling or grammatical errors. And then from there, I just need to make it look good, pretty up everything, like basically add textures to make it all look nice, make it feel like a proper campaign book rather than just a bunch of words on a piece of paper.
Can I ask questions?
Yes, you can.
All right. Well, you already know from our past conversations about your project that that I'm pretty ignorant of of Dungeons and Dragons, and having played it myself. But I do have a couple of more questions that I haven't asked, I think, before. And one is sort of, since this I'm of a generation that didn't know about Dungeons and Dragons, can you explain briefly what is the attraction of an activity like this? Why do people like it?
So I can explain why me and my friends like it, though a lot of people have a lot of different reasons for liking it. I like it because I enjoy the idea that I can sit down at a table with my friends. I can create this character that is completely fictional, but I can basically treat them as real in a sense. I'm building them to be their own character, and then from there, there is this entire world out there that whoever's running the game has set up, and we can go adventuring through it. And there's honestly, I think the biggest draw of that is the freedom with which you can interact with the world. Like, obviously, every world is going to have its own laws and stuff. Like, don't go stabbing people on the street and whatnot. But as far as like fighting monsters and whatnot, or solving mysteries, how you approach things is very different from a video game. Like, a video game usually expects you to just walk up and hit a monster until it dies, but in Dungeons & Dragons, if you want, you can sneak around it or trap it or like do any number of things to basically get past that monster.
I have difficult. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I have difficulty. I think you're contrasting a novel which has a progression, and as you said, you can read it 10 times, and every time it's going to end in the same way. And this is the absolute opposite. And so that's a useful image, I suppose. It's not. It's to me, it's not sufficient, and there's no. I'm not saying that that's your fault, but it just is. That's the way I see it. Is a Dungeons and Dragons game? Is it like a quest? Do you have a quest? Is there a goal to it?
Yes. So I guess I can actually use the adventure that I'm writing as a bit of an example for this. The goal of this adventure is basically to solve like a string of more murders and apprehend the person behind them.
Okay, that
and the adventure basically ends once you finally find out who is behind everything and are able to apprehend them. And I guess the different ways that it can end is, one of them is the person behind them specifically has like a motive that certain people might sympathize with, and should the party should the players choose to, they can choose in the end to let them go. That's not necessarily a written part of the adventure, but like for the most part, the adventure, I guess, expects or intends that they will apprehend him, but that's not necessarily what they have to do. They can choose to say, "Oh, well, I think what you're fighting for is right, and we'll let you go and just say we finished the job."
Interesting. Okay, so that's where the freedom comes in, I guess. Does the dungeon master know who the villain is?
Oh, yes, very much so. That's actually part of one of the things that I've been trying to tweak as much as possible, is the dungeon master is supposed to know everything that happens behind the scenes. They know who the villain is and what's going on at any given moment, and part of it is basically like making sure there are like little boxes full of notes that tell the dungeon master, don't tell the players this, but this is who the bad guy is.
Okay, one last question. We have quite a number of we have had quite a number of students from the game design program at RIT go through this course, and so I've seen, Meg and I have seen a number of games that students have developed and made. But and oftentimes, when they get closer, maybe closer than you've gotten so far to an end product, they have some sort of user feedback system that they follow to, to make sure that people think, no, this is a cool game. I could play this game, that sort of thing. Do you have any of that in mind?
So my intention so far, at least for the lower end stuff, is this is something I'm actually planning on trying to run for my friends, and basically get some feedback from them as I go through it. The big difference overall, though, is going through it start to finish, in my mind, would probably take 10 sets of like 4-hour sessions each. So it's not really something I can do before the project ends, unfortunately. That being said, it's something I'd very much like to continue and even expand upon after outside the scope of this project, and hopefully even turn it into like a larger adventure, maybe go for like the full 10 levels or even a little beyond that.
Okay, thanks very much. It's a fascinating project. Meg?
Yep, thanks, Stephen. So that was really interesting, Zach, and you actually started to answer one of my questions, which was what comes next for you? And, it sounds like it's been a passion project, something built from probably a childhood of loving D&D, but I'm just wondering, like, what's going to be next for you for this?
So the overall goal, like the end goal of all of this, is to hopefully have a PDF, or maybe even, depending on how things go, a printed book that I could basically market. I've seen like one of the big ones that I think I usually talk about is there is a setting out there called Humblewood that is an entire D&D adventure that is not made by the creators of D&D. It's made by basically people that had a love for D&D like I do, but had this idea for this whole world and this adventure in it, and sat down. They went through a whole Kickstarter for it, and they sat down, they wrote it, they made PDFs and even printed versions of the book and sold them. And I always thought that was really cool. I thought, like, I figured if I can like do this sort of thing where I can like write about these different worlds and adventures that I enjoy so much, and then also like make some income off of that as well, that sounded pretty good to me.
Absolutely. And I think it sounds like you're doing your own customer discovery to some degree by trying it out on your friends and getting some, substantive feedback. And if it doesn't end up being something that you can monetize, it's something that certainly would act as, something that's really demonstrative of your skill set. Whether it's something you're physically handing to a potential employer and saying, here's some of the stuff that I can do, creative assets, etc. The storytelling, the narrative work. It's just a great way for you to show off even digitally what you can do, which is really one of the objectives that we have for this class, one of the top ones. So I think it's great. I think it's a really interesting project, and I hope that even if you finish up and you wrap up your degree and you move on, you'll keep us posted on what you're doing with it, because that would be really cool.
Yeah, of course.
Zach, just in case you didn't notice it, Magree has a suggestion, recommendation in the chat that you might want to look at.
Oh, applications. GIS. What does GIS stand for? I know it's like.
Golisano Institute of Sustainability.
Well, it's
Oh, okay. Gotcha. I didn't know if it was I assumed the G stood for geography.
Well, it might be
But-
that she's talking about geospatial information systems
Oh,
courses,
Okay.
which are mapping courses.
Right. So
So that could be really cool, especially if you're using, you know, other technology, QR codes, et cetera. It would be cool.
Yeah, that's definitely a good suggestion. I really would like to look into more like, well, geospatial stuff like that, because I know like I mean I can create a map pretty easily, but making one that feels a lot more realistic,
Absolutely.
That's-
And it's interactive. Yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to keep people too much longer.
Right.
So I'll just wrap by saying again, if you all did a great job, and if there's your own presentation that you really don't want us to hold, they were great, so I hope you'll hold them, let us hold them for you, then just email me and let me know. And then look for an email that'll come out later this afternoon, this evening, that will, sorry,